Welcome, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, especially with our featured guest, George Spears, Citrix CTP, who we're going to introduce here in a minute. We're really excited to have George join us today and really talk about how he troubleshoots end-user experience issues, specifically in the world of health IT, when organizations are using these larger EMR, EHR solutions like Epic, Cerner, Allscripts, Meditech, within their virtualized Citrix environment. By additional ways of introductions, I have Avi Lip, who's our senior technical consultant here at Goliath and has worked with a number of our clients, helping them troubleshoot. And then my name's Stacy Leidwinger here with the marketing team. So as people start to join in, I do want to do just a little bit of housekeeping. So in terms of an agenda today, George is really going to walk us through what are some of the common challenges he faces as an administrator in health IT. He's going to talk about how he troubleshoots those. And then Avi's actually going to demonstrate Goliath technology to really emphasize how purpose-built solutions can help that troubleshooting workflow. We then are going to leave plenty of time for questions, so please do submit your questions. We got a few ahead of time that we'll be walking through. And one we always get is, will this recording be available? Yes, within 24 hours, you'll have a copy of this recording in your inbox. All right, so with that, I am going to do one, I'll introduce George. And so George, he's been with us here at Goliath on some of these webcasts before, if you might have caught him, but George has extensive experience as a Citrix architect working with enterprise organizations in the UK. He's a blogger, he's an evangelist, author, speaker. You might have seen him on some CUGC events. He also has deep expertise when it comes to Citrix. He's been a CTP since 2018, very knowledgeable around NetScaler, PVS, XenApp, Zen Desktop, Zen Server, NVIDIA Grid, and also, as we are in healthcare, an Epic certified administrator. So George, thank you very much for joining us today, as always. Now, one slide then on Goliath, and then I'm going to pass it over to George. So at Goliath, we really are known as the health IT standard. And the reason is we recognize and see everyday health systems struggling with some key things that are different than many enterprises. One of the things around healthcare is often in that IT world, you have 50% of the resources, the people to support the overall infrastructure. So you have less people and tooling. Then you're really servicing those clinicians that are on the front line of patient care. So if they can't get access to the applications they need, literally it's negatively impacting that experience with the patient. So these are highly intensive situations. And I think George is going to talk a little bit also where the whole overall environment in health IT is different in that users typically don't always have a desktop. We've been talking about remote users because of the pandemic, everyone working from home, but reality is in healthcare, those clinicians and medical staff have always been roaming from patient room to patient room. Telehealth has been on the rise even more now. So a lot of these challenges are very unique to healthcare, and there's a lot of complexity because again, you're using some of these very large, complex EMR, EHR, clinical applications all within that virtualized environment, which makes it very hard to get end-to-end visibility. So we at Goliath have heard this. We've heard it from health IT systems and health solutions. We've also heard it from the EMR and EHR vendors like Cerner, Epic, Meditech, Allscripts, all of who we have business and technical relationships with. Based on our experience working with health IT, working with CTPs like George himself, working with these EHR vendors, we've built a purpose-built product that has embedded intelligence and automation that will automatically help discover your entire environment, identify what to monitor, and alert you anytime performance thresholds are exceeded based on industry best practices. And we've done that specifically in integrating performance metrics from those EHR modules. So we're the only vendor that has these purpose-built modules that include Cerner, Meditech, Epic, Allscripts, which can really have an impact on how clinicians and overall end users can positively impact patient care. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to George. And George, why don't you talk about some of the challenges that you face every day working in these health system environments?
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. Thanks for the kind introduction. And hello, everybody on the call today. Yeah, I wanted to begin by talking about the user perception when it comes to working within an EHR app. So we've all heard it before. My EHR app is running slow, but what does that actually mean? So unfortunately, to the IT admin, it doesn't really mean anything useful. And that's because there could be 100 reasons why it is slow. Um, it's the end user's perception that their EHR app is slow, or it could be that their perception that Citrix is slow. However, in reality, it's often caused by something else, and that's something else that's needed to perform well in order for the EHR app to perform well. Think of network, storage, hypervisor hardware, virtual machine performance, and so on, both for the Citrix elements and also the EHR vendor systems. So on to the reality. When EHR is slow, is it actually EHR? Not quite. So the user sees the app as EHR, but look at this slide and look at how much actually goes on in the background. I think this slide shows the complexity of a typical Citrix and EHR app delivery very well. And if we start from the left of the slide, we have all our users. Now, obviously, due to the global pandemic and how people work has changed dramatically. We have a lot of people now working from home. We do still have the majority of users within the office, especially in healthcare. Professionals have to be there to provide for patients. But we do have a number of people that will connect from branch offices, external sites, and they may use Citrix Gateway or come in direct. We also have our remote users, as I mentioned, and they could again be using Citrix Gateway, or they could be using a VPN solution. So right away we have users coming in from all these different locations. They're all using different types of devices. They're all using different network connections. So we have a lot of complexity right away, and we've really only touched the surface, which is the access layer. So as those connections move inside our data center, this is where we have the core appliances, so the infrastructure and the networking elements. For Citrix, we have our Citrix ADCs, storefront servers, and these components are the front door for our users. Then we have the important broker servers and also the Citrix desktops themselves, which host our EHR apps. Moving down the slide slightly, we have supporting servers, which are equally critical, such as our SQL servers, our user profile servers, license servers, and Active Directory. And all of these servers sit on hypervisors such as VMware, ESX, or Hyper-V, but they could also sit on public cloud, so clouds such as Azure, if you're using, say, the virtual apps and desktop service from Citrix Cloud. And I haven't even touched on the actual EHR infrastructure servers. And these all typically sit on database servers and other infrastructure type servers that is required to make the EHR solution work. So it's really not unfair to say that there is a lot of complexity going on here. All these components need to be running optimally 24/7. So if one of the components underperforms, it could cause that slowness, and it could cause those my EHR app is slow type tickets into the help desk. And it's also worth mentioning that when you troubleshoot such issues, and if for example, you don't have the correct monitoring solution in place, without that data and without the core evidence that you need, IT admins often end up pointing the issue at another element of the infrastructure, such as the network, or maybe it's Citrix, or maybe it's storage. And this finger pointing really just prolongs the issue, which obviously isn't necessary, and it really isn't ideal, especially in healthcare, never mind any industry. So as I look back on my experience supporting healthcare as a Citrix admin, I've gone and chosen the 3 of my top problems, basically, and these obviously aren't extensive by any means, but these are ones I've specifically chosen, and hopefully you can relate to them as well in your environment. So they are audio and dictation issues, long log-on times, and printing issues. So let's talk about these challenging end user issues. So first up is the audio and dictation issues. And this is something I've come across quite often in healthcare. So the scenario is that consultants, they spend their time dictating patient notes, and then their secretaries transcribe those dictations into letters. At times, we may receive reports to the help desk from the secretaries that the dictations they listen back to are suffering from poor audio quality, and this makes it hard to understand, what the consultant is saying. So the secretary is struggling to make that audio out. Equally, the secretary may not be able to play back the dictations at all. That could be a permanent issue, such as software missing from the PC, or it could be random where sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, so it could be intermittent. To troubleshoot these issues, if a ticket lands on your desk, firstly check the affected user's latency to their EHR app, which will be hosted on Citrix, for example. And not just latency, even packet loss. Both latency and packet loss can obviously have a real detrimental effects to the audio quality. Secondly, I would suggest to analyze the audio virtual channel bandwidth consumption. So you might find that there's a particular channel consuming lots of bandwidth, and maybe it's impacting the audio channel. So, for example, a video channel could be consuming a lot of bandwidth. Maybe a user is accidentally playing a video from a website or an advertisement, and they don't realize, and that's through their Citrix environment. And it's eating up a lot of valuable bandwidth, and it's causing impact to the remaining channels in that Citrix stack. So having analyzing the channels will allow you to obviously have a constructive conversation with the end user. Tell them that this is what you've seen. You've seen high bandwidth consumption on the video channel, and maybe they want to check out if there's any videos playing in the background, because if they close them off, that may impact or improve their experience with the dictations. And finally, I would suggest reviewing your Citrix audio setup. So from a Citrix perspective, audio quality should be set to medium, and you should also use RTP for audio, and that stands for the real-time transport protocol. That's a Citrix recommendation, and it really is the best protocol for delivering audio in a Citrix virtual apps and desktops environment. Avi, is there anything extra you would like to share around this?
I think those are all awesome points, George. And what I was going to do next is actually just pull up within the technology to show how our clients are able to use some of that valuable information that George was just describing, how within the technology we can assist with those troubleshooting steps. So let me pull up the technology right now. And where I'm going to start is on the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop session display. And this is where all the Citrix sessions in a healthcare environment would populate. So both your active sessions, so any of the clinicians that are currently logging in, or any of the previous sessions, say the sessions that took place 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. We don't average or roll up our data. So you can always pull up those historical sessions to understand, okay, what was happening with that audio issue last Tuesday? So when you're ready to then investigate as to what could be causing the performance issues for an end user, you can just search for that user's name. So search for Clinician Avi. Then when you're ready to dive into their session, you just click on the user, and what will populate is a screen that has all the high-level key data points that went into this user's Citrix session. So you're able to see the client endpoint machine, the client IP address, the receiver version that's on the endpoint. You have a mini topology view here where you're able to see all the components that contributed to this user Citrix session in a single view. So the client endpoint machine, how they connected into the environment. Was this an internal connection? Was it an external connection? The delivery controller that brokered the session, AD, the session host, and then the hypervisor host if incorporated. You have a high-level log-on summary breakdown, and then key performance metrics here to quickly be able to pinpoint root cause of any in-session performance issues. Now, it's great that you have all this information rolled up onto one screen. Oftentimes L1 or help desk don't need to leave this view right here to quickly identify what the bottleneck is. But if you notice across the top, there's a series of dedicated tabs that are going to provide you insight into log-on duration metrics, the ICA and HDX connection protocols. Then you move into the data center where you're then looking at your session host, hypervisor host metrics, processes, as well as alerts and event logs. So let's go through a scenario where there's potential, there's an impact on audio, and we're trying to understand what was the root cause there. Oftentimes our clients can find the answer from the IC and HDX tab. And as George mentioned, there's a number of different variables that can play a role here. Was it a network related issue? Was it potentially end user behavior? Did they have some sort of video running within the session that was restricting the bandwidth? And we can get that type of insight from this view right here. First place that you will most common want to take a look at is round trip time. And what you can see here is that we have these data interpretation lines where one's at 350, one's at 450 milliseconds. So what those lines are showing as I hover over round trip time, I'm trying to understand, was round trip time above that threshold? Was it above 350 or 450 milliseconds? Because at that point, that's when latency will be apparent to the end user. So in this case, let's say user was complaining about poor audio, and you see that round trip time is spiking. Okay, so it looks like the user is having performance issues. We then want to be able to understand what was the cause. And as we're discussing it, could be a lack of bandwidth available at that user's location. So the top right chart over here, this connection speed metric, this is the amount of bandwidth that is available for receiver or the workspace app, wherever the clinician or doctor is working from. So say if it's a doctor that's working from home, this would be the amount of bandwidth that's available from their home Wi-Fi, as an example. And again, you have these data interpretation lines that are allowing me to quickly see that the connection speed. And since this is all timestamped down to the second, I can see that that user did have over 50 megabits per second of connection speed at one point. So if they're saying, hey, it can't be my ISP, maybe that could be true. But what happened was at the end of this session, we can see that there was a huge drop in connection speed, all the way down to 2.7. Well, at a bare minimum, you need at least like 10 megabits per second to support a satisfactory Citrix session based off of what the user is doing. But at a bare minimum, that's the number that you should be thinking of. So when I see that connection speed not only plummeted significantly, which Citrix is inherently adaptive, it's going to try to adjust, but a huge drop like that is going to impact performance, but it dropped all the way down to well below that critical threshold. So it's easy to point out in this scenario, yes, this user was having performance issues, and it directly correlates with a huge drop in available bandwidth at their location. So that's one thing where we're able to see as far as a performance issue. Was it a network related issue? So was this, at this particular hospital site where this clinician was on the 3rd floor, was there a huge drop in bandwidth available right there? Just as an example of how you can quickly pinpoint what the root cause was. And since we don't average or roll up any of our data, you can always go back historically and understand, okay, was there performance issues at that time, such as this? Now, something else that George brought up that's very important is being able to understand what else could be going on within that user's session that could impact performance. So we talked about things from a network perspective. Obviously, resources could also impact performance, but something that is often a blind spot to IT and being able to troubleshoot that is end user behavior. And the way how we're able to give insight into end user behavior is that Citrix, the way how Citrix is architected is that there's virtual channels that handle different functionalities. So for example, we're talking about audio bandwidth. You have the audio bandwidth channel. You have the clipboard bandwidth channel. You have the thin wire bandwidth channel, which is the Citrix display adapter for anything that's graphically intensive. And so you'll notice that all these are broken down inbound and outbound. This is from the server perspective. So audio bandwidth in, was that user doing Dragon Dictation and talking into their session? Audio bandwidth out, was that user streaming Pandora while they were working? And what you're able to then get insight into is based off of the bandwidth channels that are being utilized within that clinician or doctor session, you're able to understand what that user was doing. So say if audio bandwidth inbound, you see that the bandwidth is being utilized, but there's nothing returning back from the session host. That's a good indicator of where there could be at least giving you the direction on where you need to look. And then George brought up a very good point here is, say if there is a video that's actually running in the background, restricting some of the bandwidth that's available for Dragon Dictation as an example, you'd be able to see that here. So in this is a great example of that, where we have the thin wire bandwidth that's being heavily utilized here, which could be something graphically intensive like a video. And we can see that correlates also with a huge spike in round trip time. So not only was there a huge drop in connection speed at the end of the session, but there was also a huge increase in thin wire bandwidth that was being utilized. So it's a combination of a number of things in this scenario on why there is high round trip time. Now, this is just one screen that you're able to get a lot of granular detail. We also are able to show all the processes that are running on the session host. So say if there is particular, a process that's running hot on CPU or memory, that could be impacting performance. We have automatic remediation capabilities where you can restart a respective process. And then the alerts and the event logs. So say if there was a Dragon Dictation or an Imprivata issue, you can see the alerts right in here, obviously be proactively notified on each of these alerts, as well as any application or system error warning event that took place during the time frame of the user session. So it's using a couple of different data points all within a single view to quickly be able to understand, and how our clients use this information to quickly pinpoint what the bottleneck is and how it actually is impacting performance.
And Avi, this event log, sorry to jump in here, this can be extremely powerful. We were just working with one of our healthcare IT clients, and they were getting a very cryptic error log from Dragon Dictation. And so the assumption was that it was a Dragon Dictation error. Well, whenever they were able to find that error in the event log for that user, look it up, it ended up being a challenge with their Windows services. And so what was a problem that could have taken them hours or days to troubleshoot only took them 30 minutes because they were able to see that specific error log message in the user session when Dragon Dictation fell out. So there's a lot of ways to really capture that information quickly so that you can go ahead and resolve it. And this is the stuff we hear from our clients on a daily basis.
Absolutely. So what last thing that I'm going to show, that was just in our lab environment. I did want to show how this will represent in a healthcare environment where you're able to see, from that session display, any of the sessions that have high latency, you're able to see the specific applications that those users were in. So, whether it's PowerChart, FirstNet, you're able to see these specific applications right within the session display to, again, get that extra insight into what that user was doing. With that, I'm going to then pass this back to George. And George, I believe you're going to be talking about logon times.
Yeah, thanks, Avi. I think one of the interesting things, or one of the many interesting things you touched on was being able to historically look back on a user session and see if they had latency, for example. As you were talking about it, I was just thinking of a scenario where maybe a ticket is logged with the help desk, and maybe that ticket sits with the first line for a couple of days, and then it's escalated to the Citrix admin. But by then, the useful data that you need to troubleshoot may be lost. So it's obviously important to have a monitoring solution in place that captures all of the user session data historically, and that's really so that you can look back in time to see if there was an issue at that time. So with that said, yeah, I'm going to talk about long logon times. and this is the next challenge that I want to touch on. So logon times are obviously very important. Everybody wants to get their apps without little delay. And with that said, logon times are important everywhere in every industry, but very much so in healthcare. So in the healthcare environments, we have clinicians and medical staff, and they sometimes don't have a PC. So they all encounter frequent logons as they move from workstation to workstation, or as staff come and go from workstations, in between providing care to patients. And this really does increase the importance of logon times. And it also highlights how a slow logon can really impact users and ultimately impact patient care. So logon time slowness, it is very important, but equally it can be very difficult to troubleshoot when it comes to determining root cause. And I could actually refer back to a previous slide I talked about, showing the complexity of the Citrix environment and the EHR environment, and all the different components that are needed to make it work, such as the Citrix components, the network, CPU, RAM, all the virtual app servers. All these components need to obviously work well to ensure that the logon is not impacted. And if you did have high RAM, high CPU, maybe slow profile load, slow group policy processing, or maybe you had an underperforming network or an underperforming storage array, they can all impact slow logons. But until you know that's happening, you're really left in the dark. And also, it's not easy to prove that SLAs are being met, especially when you don't have third-party monitoring in place. So how can we actually troubleshoot these long logon times? So obviously I mentioned they are difficult, they are complex. So for these, I like to tackle them with a process of elimination. And this really helps me to focus on what matters versus what doesn't matter. So it's really about checking for patterns and consistencies. Things like, are all users impacted? Is it a particular office? Is it particular users on a VDA, or is it just one user? Also, is it consistently slow, or is it only slow at certain points? So it's really knowing these finer details about the issue, the magnitude of the issue and the scope. That allows you to avoid wasting time finding root cause. You obviously want to review the health of your infrastructure. I mean, that goes pretty much without saying. So reviewing the health of your network, your storage, the hypervisor hardware, and the virtual infrastructure. And how you do that obviously depends on what monitoring solution you have, if you have one. If your organization lacks the right monitoring solution, there could be a lot of manual effort checking all the different components that I showed in the previous slide. And also you may have to engage with other teams, like the network team, the storage team, Active Directory team, to make sure that the infrastructure that they're responsible for is healthy. So you can imagine how that could take a lot of time and a lot of manual effort. And finally, you may need to enable some extra logging. Obviously, logging helps in all aspects. That could be logging at the group policy level. It could be logging on the virtual machines that host the EHR app, or logging against your profile solution. Maybe you're using FS Logics. You can enable logging at that level also. And this is really intended to eliminate the components that are not responsible for these slow logons, and narrowing the issue down. So to close out on this slide, it's obviously going to require effort. It's going to require some time, unless you have the right monitoring solution, which can obviously help you with that. And it can go a long way to finding the root cause quicker. Avi, I'll at this stage like to pass it over to you so you can delve into a bit more of the finer details around that.
Sounds good. Thanks, George. And yeah, logons, to George's point, are sometimes very difficult to troubleshoot. And his point about process of elimination is one that we'll often have to go through, because it's not as simply put as, okay, was it just a network issue? Sometimes it's, okay, were all the users having high logon times? Was it a drive mapping policy that was incorrectly mapped? Was it just this user this one time that they were having high logon? So a lot of variables that sometimes you have to dive into to kind of pinpoint what the issue is. And so we do try to give as much insight into the logon process as we can. And so this is something that our clients tell us is very valuable for them, as opposed to some of the other tools that are out there, because you're going to get like 6 to 8 different stages of the logon process with some of the other tools out there. We're going to give you 33 different stages, 33 plus, where here's a scenario where we're back on that session display screen where we clicked on the logon duration tab, and say you get an alert that there's a high logon time. You pull up that session. In this case, you can immediately see that. Drill down to the brokering stages, where here we're going to break them out from the delivery controller and Citrix receiver. And as far as for the metrics with Citrix receiver, we're getting all this through our integration with Citrix. We don't have to deploy any technology to the endpoint machines themselves. And so what we're seeing in this particular case, we're seeing profile load was consuming the majority of the time in this logon. We then take a look at the logon stage details from the session host. Or in this case, we see that the group policies were taking 190 seconds. We can then drill down into each of the respective group policies, down to the policy name and how long each one took to execute. So in this case, whereas a VDA drive mapping policy that was incorrectly mapped, adding over 180 seconds to the logon process, the IT admin was able to quickly identify this, know where to focus their attention, and resolve the issue. And we've had healthcare clients that have been able to cut down on logon times by over 80% because of this level of granular detail. And then just to kind of show where this was in the technology, right from the session display where we started, let me share out my screen there. There we go. Where you can sort by longest logon times, being able to compare based off of time. So was there a point in time where there were those high logon times, and trying to understand, okay, is everyone logging in at the same time, and maybe the delivery controller was being overutilized? And so then to dive into the individual user sessions, you just click on the user, click on the logon duration tab, and this is where I just was on that screenshot, where again, you're getting the brokering stages. You're able to see logon stage details from the session host. For authentication, you can drill down into that and be able to see the OUs that user was a part of, the domain controller that authenticated the user. And then, as we were just discussing, the group policies. We're able to see the policy name and how long each one took to execute. So it's, again, having just a single view to quickly be able to drill into what could be causing long logon. And we've had healthcare clients where they have these like 30-10 SLAs that they need to meet, where 30-second logons for initial logons and then 10-second reconnects. And so our clients have been able to use this data not only to just troubleshoot and get those logons down to that appropriate level, but then they're able to actually use the data and have it be used in a reporting way, so that they could then show this to management that the SLAs were being exceeded and being met. So here you can just see an example of one of the reports where you're able to see logons, on average over a period of time. You're able to see the specific parts of the logon on this bottom graph here. So, the average time for the logon scripts, authentication, the profile load, GPOs. And this is where it's easy to say something along the lines of, all right, we made a change on this, just for example, on March 27th, logon times were at 51 seconds. And then we made those changes and it dropped them all the way down to say 38 seconds. So it allows you to then be able to really understand from a high level overview, are the changes that you're making positively impacting logon times, or if they're negatively impacting, that you need to revert back to how things were. And with that, George, I believe our next troubleshooting scenario that we want to touch on is printing.
It is, yeah. Thanks, Avi. And knowing that a monitoring solution has more than 33 stages of the logon process broken down, it definitely gives you a good level of confidence, when it comes to troubleshooting the slow logon issues. So yeah, the final issue I wanted to touch on was about printing and printing issues. So printing is obviously very important in healthcare. And a typical healthcare organization prints a lot every day, 24/7 basically. However, as you probably all know on the call, printing is complex to set up. It's complex to configure and maintain. And if things go wrong with your printing infrastructure, you're likely going to see a lot of calls come into the help desk very quickly. So things can escalate very fast. So what can we do if a clinician or medical staff cannot print? So firstly, kind of like the log-on times and the log-on slowness, we need to understand the scope and the impact of the problem. So how many people cannot print? What are they trying to print? Where are they trying to print to? Obviously, no print job is going to be the same. Some print jobs flow through Citrix, and some bypass Citrix and flow through the EHR infrastructure. They're all going to different queues. They're all going to different physical printers, and these printers are scattered around the hospital. Some printers are hardwired into network points. Other printers are wirelessly connected and so on. So there's a lot of variables, a lot of complexity with that. And you may also have remote sites that link into your EHR infrastructure, and they have their own printers. They could be managed by a different IT team, depending on the setup there. And obviously, with those guys, remote sites, the print jobs flow outside of your data center, so they take different networking routes. So understanding the impacts, what queues are not functioning, who is impacted, that's obviously the first key step to troubleshooting these printer issues. Afterwards, you can use whatever monitoring or print tracking software you have to watch the print jobs as they flow through your infrastructure. So some EHR providers have print tracking software that allows you to do that. You can also ask the user to retry the print job, and at that time you can maybe track the job and see if it reaches the queue. Maybe it does, maybe the print job does reach the queue, but it doesn't clear from the queue. And this could indicate that there's a problem with the printer or the network, or maybe the job actually never reaches the queue, meaning that it's failed somewhere earlier in the process. So that would mean you'd investigate higher up the chain, maybe at your EHR infrastructure servers or the other components that print job flows through. And finally, you'll often check the print server's health. Maybe there could be a print spooler that has crashed due to bad drivers. That's very common. You would check the queues on the print servers. Are the print queues responding? Like, can you send a ping test to the queues? Can you reach the printer's web interface? Just basic sort of connectivity checks to ensure that there's connectivity to those queues. You may even send a team on site. So if you determine that it doesn't seem to be a software issue, you might send an on-site team to actually visit the location of the hospital, checking over the physical elements of the printer itself. Maybe there's no toner, something as simple as that. It does happen. Maybe a roller isn't in place. Maybe there's been a network cable that's been unplugged accidentally by one of the staff members. So again, for a serious problem such as printing, it is rather complex to troubleshoot. There is a lot of different components that need to be working to make print jobs work. Monitoring can obviously play an important part, and it can potentially automate some of those, what I just talked about. And that will obviously help reduce the time it takes to find a root cause, whatever the issue may be. Avi, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
There is. I think those were some awesome points, George. And so how Goliath can help out with some of those scenarios specifically around printing is a couple of different ways. One area that I do want to touch back on, and this is the Ica channels obviously provides a ton of information. So as long as you have the ability to see the different channels, you can be able to break certain things down and understand what was going on. And how that plays a role with printing is that we're breaking out a couple of the different ICA channels that have to do with printing. So the printer bandwidth, this is for where spoolers are involved. We break open the different device ports. So if you're utilizing a COM port for your print jobs, that's something where being able to see, okay, that clinician thought that they were printing something out, but there was no bandwidth being utilized on that COM port. Maybe that's where the issue is. So you're able to, again, understanding the different channels that are being utilized, getting insight into how that could be impacting printing. We've talked about from audio, we've talked about user behavior, but able to still use this area of the technology for printing issues. Now, something else that we touched on was the alerts and the event logs and how that can play a role. You can always, if there were printing issues, just as an example, you can always come here, search in prints, And here I can see that there were a couple printing errors that took place during this session. So being able to analyze the logs right there, to George's point, make it very simple to just find them here. And then for the alerts, we have out of the box alerts that are looking for failures and events with print jobs. So let me pull up a screenshot of one of the ways that one of our healthcare clients actually has these printing alerts set up, where in this case, they're having issues with the print spooler service. And what they did was they created a monitoring alert so that anytime that there is an error there, the technology would automatically restart the service. And then they actually had a custom script that they wrote where the technology, based off of that monitoring rule being started, that custom script then sent an email to the end users or a notification saying, hey, we're restarting that print spooler service, we're clearing the queue, and you need to resend your print job. So it allows the technology to not only get ahead of these issues, but take remediation steps that you may have had to do manually previously, but because of the embedded intelligence and automation of the technology, our clients are allowed to have the technology take those remediation actions for them instead of them having to spend the time to do them. And in this particular case, this healthcare system, I believe it's Marietta Memorial Health, they were able to reduce printer tickets by 60% by utilizing Goliath. So those were a couple points. George, anything else that you wanted to add on printing?
No, just that the remediation is obviously, pretty cool to be able to inform a user that they need to reprint. It's definitely important in healthcare, and the 60% reduction in tickets is pretty impressive also. Good work.
Thanks. Thank the developers. And so with that, the next area that we are going to, let me pull this up.
Yep.
Some questions, I believe, for you, George.
Yeah, these are so some commonly asked questions that I would see out in the field. So obviously reporting has become more important due to the global pandemic. There is a large portion of users now working from home across all different industries. That probably will not change, I don't think, in my personal opinion. And management, obviously, they want to ensure that we are still delivering top quality IT services wherever the user is. So now that they're at home, that service shouldn't diminish in any way. So some of the commonly asked questions around a Citrix solution would be, how many Citrix licenses are in use? So management want to make sure that we aren't breaching our licensing limits. And obviously, if we were, that could impact users because they would get access denied if we go over that limit. So it's certainly a concern for management. Other ones is, what is the average logon time? So I touched on logon times and how they're important, especially in healthcare where there's so many logons per day. And this obviously is becoming more important for users as they work from home, because obviously there's a lot of different elements that are at play from the user's home network to their device that could impact that logon time. So that's obviously another hot ask from management. How many users are connected through VPN and Citrix Gateway? So we make these solutions accessible for our users to be productive. And management like to get a feel for how users actually connect. Typically, if it's VPN, the user may be using a corporate device like a laptop, or if it's just through plain Citrix Gateway, it may be a personal device like an Apple Mac or a personal Windows workstation. And then what is the per user session latency, or what is the average latency for all users? So if we can show that latency on average is low, we know our data center, our network offering is working as expected. We will always get some users that have high latency, but that's typically because issues on their side, such as maybe they're connected to Wi-Fi, but the signal isn't strong enough, or there's some local device issues going on that's impacting the latency to the Citrix apps and desktops. So you're always going to get some people that will have high latency. It's unavoidable, but it's really important to have the average at an acceptable limit. So to be able to respond to these questions, obviously reports come in handy, they become useful, and showing that information in a report is the right way to go. Stacey, I believe you have some reports that you wanted to show.
Yes, so thank you, George. And we hear this from our clients all the time, right? It's really all about the data, which drives visibility. And so we get asked often, how do you really share the data that we can get from Goliath via reports? How can I integrate it into third-party systems, whether it's a ServiceNow, a Splunk, Slack, which we can do? And then really, how do you enhance it, maybe through Power BI and other tools to really highlight trends over time? So we allow organizations to take that data, share it broadly, integrate it into their systems, enhance it with third-party visualization. And we do this fundamentally in 3 areas. So we've got end user performance reports, and I'll show you a few examples where you can really drill into that experience. What type of experience are they having? What's their logon latency? We also have activity type reports. So really understanding, are they being productive? Do they have the right tools so that they're being productive? And we hear this a lot now with remote working. Are people working from home? When are they working? How long are they working? What are their work hours? A lot has changed as people took their office to home. And anyone that's used this report, the common feedback has always been people are working more than they were in the office. Also, we can talk about Citrix usage, peak usage, license usage. We're getting a lot of questions now, right? I think many people kind of ran out and said, let me just get some more extra licenses as everyone starts to work from home. Well, now that people are starting to come back to the office, many are still working from home, really doing a gut check. Are we using all the licenses that we have? And then from a system perspective, you saw a lot of what Avi showed. We can absolutely run reports to really talk about utilization, memory utilization, storage usage, VM performance, health performance, all for that underlying architecture, as well as cloud. So we can do this not only, we've been talking a lot Citrix, but we support Horizon. We support the ability to monitor and report around performance for AWS EC2, Azure, WVD as well. And so, Avi, if you want to move in to the next slide, I'd say this is one of our newer reports, but immediately being used is this end user experience scorecard. So we get a lot of requests from our IT pros saying, management wants to know, what is our overall end user experience? And most importantly, how does that compare to others? So this scorecard allows IT pros to benchmark their performance against industry standards. So we're literally giving you a score that you can see how that qualifies relative to the market and best practices. And then one of the things that we really believe in is not just giving you a score that looks great, but giving you something that's actionable. So if you see, maybe it is in this example, network latency that's red, you can drill in and see exactly which users are having a negative experience so you can take action. We know there's a lot of analytics out there in the market, and this is the gap that IT pros have shared with us, in that often we'll see these red, yellow kind of stoplight looking metrics, but when we go to drill in, we can't actually see the data to create a fix. So it's almost like we're getting another end user ticket complaining, but now we have a ton of homework to go figure out how to fix it. We're identifying exactly who has the problem, and then, as Avi showed, you can drill in and resolve that. So this allows you to benchmark even internally as well, really isolate where issues are and go address the problem. We also have a number of other out-of-the-box reports. As I mentioned, one, we have a user productivity report, and this report showing you every individual user session, when they logged on, the duration, and how active they were in that session. The other thing we're showing you is max inactivity. Everyone walks away to have lunch, take a phone call. They might not be active in their session. And so we have a lot of clients that are saying, I'm not so much concerned about how active someone is or not, but I really want to be able to find any type of anomalies in the data. Is someone logging in and starting their day, and then they're not getting back to their computer for 4 hours? The other thing people are using then for this for, and actually I think a higher use case, is around security. So I talk about anomalies in behavior for productivity. There's also anomalies in for security. Is someone all of a sudden logging in at 3 a.m. when they're typically not? Is someone who typically is in finance using Excel and finance applications all of a sudden running PowerShell scripts? This is what this report can go ahead and show you. The next report then, as an example, is our end user experience report. So this is a little bit more numeric, not as graphical as the scorecard, but it really does break down per session. Are they having a good logon experience? Is there ICA latency? What is their client connection speed? So again, you can really benchmark this over time and determine, and you can run this based on groups. You could run this based on all my remote workers versus those that are in the office so that you can compare. And then, as I mentioned, the last one, just as an example, is around kind of license usage. So we absolutely can report on when's peak usage, when are people using, who's using, how often are they using. So I know, George, you talked about that question, if are people going through VPN or the gateway service, really understanding they might have a license, but they're rarely using that license. So do they really need it? So this is a great way to gut check around your overall environment of who's using Citrix, when are they using it, and how are they using it. And so as we wrap up here, we did have a few questions come in, so we're going to wrap up, but please submit any questions you have. I do want to highlight Goliath's unique value in health IT. We really tried to show and highlight some of the specific use cases as George does in his own environment and how software can help. But I want to emphasize that we at Goliath understand the pain you in health IT are feeling. We work with some of the largest health IT institutes like Ascension, Common Spirit, Universal Health Systems, as well as medium to small sized organizations. And it's because we have a price and ease of use profile that allows us to meet the smaller needs, but the technology itself can scale to support those much larger organizations. And we do that partnering with all the major EHR, EMR vendors. We have technical and business relationships with all of them that allows us to give you visibility not only in the performance of the EHR application, but that overall Citrix environment and the user behavior as Avi showed. We are partners with Epic, so you can go to Epic App Orchard website and actually purchase our software directly. We also are the only technology that has an agent deployed in Cerner RHO, so we can monitor their environment. So if you're a Cerner client, you know that Cerner hosts their application within a Citrix environment. We can give you visibility into that Citrix environment as well as your on-prem. And because of the value that we've been able to provide Cerner clients, you can actually purchase us directly from Cerner. We are the only monitoring and troubleshooting solution that you can purchase directly on Cerner paper. So with that, I do want to say if you're interested in a, I think we have one more slide around deployment. So this question does come up. Jumped ahead here a minute. It's often, how hard is it to deploy? As Avi talked about throughout the demonstration, we have embedded intelligence and automation, which allows us to get you up and running in less than 2 hours. We are going to automatically discover your entire Citrix infrastructure. We're going to identify every potential event, condition, or failure point that impacts user experience, and then alert anytime those thresholds are exceeded based on industry best practices. That's automatically deployed for you. We automatically start collecting all of this data you saw from Avi in the reports. So immediately after deployment, you can start digging into the information. And it's because of this, our clients tell us that when they use Goliath, it's as if they've hired 2 to 3 full-time troubleshooting experts, probably not as good as George, but close, that really allows them to support their environment 24/7, 365 days a week or year. And with that, if you are interested in any follow-up questions or a free trial, or you would like a custom demo where we can really dig into, our Cerner module, our Epic module, our Meditech module, please do email techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com, and we'll be happy to support you. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into some of these questions we have. There's a number that have come in here, so just looking through with our last 5 minutes. We get a question, you've mentioned EHR modules. We are a health system that uses Epic. What metrics do you collect? Avi, do you want to maybe bring up our Epic module? So I mentioned that we have these specific modules. I talked about how we're grabbing performance data. And actually, George, this is something you and I have talked about where sometimes it's challenging as the Citrix admin, you might not always have access to this data. And so when someone calls in, it's really hard to pinpoint. Maybe before, Avi, you dive into the technology, George, you want to share your perspective around trying to get access to some of the Epic metrics at times?
Yeah, so there's a lot of organizations that are running Epic off of Citrix, and the teams are split. So the Citrix admin controls the Citrix elements, and the ECSA or the Epic certified admin will control the Epic elements, and there is no crossover. So the technologies play such a close part together that it suffers more if the two teams don't have visibility into the other half. So what's really interesting about having a monitoring solution that can show both from a unified console is that the Citrix admin can tell what's happening from the EHR perspective, and equally the Epic admin can tell from a Citrix presentation side if there's anything going on. So it really just improves that collaboration. It improves being able to tackle these incidents that come to the help desk more effectively.
Awesome. Avi, you want to show what metrics we're able to grab?
Yeah, sure. So we're able to show the total counts, the average grefs, the average block reads, DB and web requests. And we also have a workflow latency dashboard that'll be able to show workflow time, average DB and web time, DB network time. So it's something where, to George's point, having a technology that you're able to be able to understand if there are issues, is it the delivery of Epic, or is it the actual back end performance of the Epic application that's the issue? And have both of these in one view when, as George mentioned, sometimes it's siloed departments. You may not have access to both of these, and be able to have the end user experience, delivery infrastructure, and then the back end performance of Epic all in a single console is something that our clients tell us is valuable.
Thank you both. Troy had asked 2 questions. How long is the trial and how do we price? So our trial by default is for 30 days. If you do need it longer, happy to set that up for you. And in terms of pricing, we really price based on IT element that we're monitoring. So it really depends on what you're looking to support. But again, we have that really flexible pricing that will allow us to scale to meet the needs of the smaller organizations, as you see here, but can absolutely support the larger deployments that you have at like a UHS or Intermountain Healthcare, as I mentioned. Here's a good question that came up. This one came from Alana. I have a need to check the health of my environment today. And when I do that, I check individual VMs or our NetScaler to see if it's working. George, do you have any advice on how to best monitor the overall health without a tool? And then Goliath, do you actually have something that gives that overarching view?
So without a tool, it's probably pretty much as you already do. So it's a manual effort of logging into your Citrix VMs, checking the health from event logs, or checking the CPU utilization or RAM utilization. If you obviously run these virtual, which I'm assuming you do, your hypervisors can give you some of that information, so you don't have to log into each individual virtual machine. But it is manual, of course, and the same applies to NetScaler. Without a monitoring solution in place, you need to log in, check again, CPU metrics, throughput, RAM usage, and so on. There's really no way to automate any of that further.
Avi, as probably George hinted here, we definitely have the ability to showcase that. Would you be, Avi's always on the ball. Thank you. I'll let you take it from here. Oh, I think you're on mute, Avi.
Yeah, the mute button nowadays. So yeah, with our technology, we have the embedded intelligence and automation to automatically discover all the components that contribute to your Citrix environment, map them out, show the different correlations between the components automatically, and display it here. So just on this first view here, you can see your NetScalers, storefront servers, delivery controllers, and any other supporting servers in the environment. And part of the embedded intelligence automation is that we have hundreds of events, conditions, failure points, and thresholds that we're looking for. And what's important about those monitoring rules here is that with those looking for all that throughout the entire environment, those monitoring rules drive this view as a heat map. So as issues start to arise on individual components, They'll turn from green to red or orange depending on the severity level of the alert. What's important about that, say if there's a broker service error on this particular delivery controller, it'll turn red, drawing your attention to exactly where you need to look, and just as important, as to where you don't need to spend any time looking. You don't want to spend a ton of time looking around the entire environment when you can easily be able to see where the issue is. Then as you click on these individual components on the right-hand side, you're going to see resource utilization, context-specific health checks, as well as any alerts that are firing off based off the embedded intelligence and automation. You have the ability to drill into the resource utilization for each of these respective machines, so not just the current performance, but you can always go back historically. So say if there are log-on issues last Tuesday and you want to see was the delivery controller being overutilized at that particular point in time, you can go back historically. And there's a couple of different views here. So as far as like the delivery view, getting a logical view of the environment. So the delivery controllers mapped out to the delivery groups, to the machine catalogs and the gold images if available, and then drilling down all the way to your hypervisor cluster and individual hypervisor hosts. So to answer the question, this is a view that's commonly used in Citrix environments to be able to see the overall health and be able to understand how there could be performance issues from a resource perspective, or just see the health overall. And this will automatically update also. One key point is that once this is up and running, you really don't have to you have very little legwork then on your end, because the technology with the embedded intelligence will automatically discover any changes that you make in the environment.